So I'm David Allen. I first encountered a woman called Dorothy Heathcote. And this is the woman who created Mantle of the Expert system. And I first encountered her in 1984. So that is 41 years ago. And so I've been working with her ideas, with her methods, um, and working in particular with Mantle of the Expert since really the 90s. I was very lucky that I did get to know Dorothy, and she helped us on a number of projects. We would go to her house, as she was then near Derby, and she'd give us some food, which she often would be up early in the morning making, and we would spend the day with her, and she'd help us to plan our projects. So, I'm going to share my PowerPoint today, but I do hope that you will feel that if at any point there's anything that's not clear, you can put your hand up, you can ask any questions. Because, well, I'd like to start actually this slideshow with a slide, one of my favorite images of Dorothy Heathcote, where she said, "Never forget to remember what you've forgotten that you know." And whenever I quote this, people always think of, what? What's that mean? What she's talking about really with teaching is that you always have to try and think back to when you didn't know things. Because we kind of take, as we learn things, we kind of take a lot for granted. And you have to try and think back to when you didn't know about things and then try and break it down for other people to learn and to understand it. So I'm always being reminded really of things that I do. I do things in my own teaching automatically, um, because it's become part of the way I work. It's become part of the way I am. So sometimes, yes, it's really good to be reminded. Oh, yes, I do that, and I've forgotten that I knew it. So now I have to remind myself. Yes, I have to think back to when I didn't know. So, as I say, do interrupt me, do ask questions if anything is not clear to you. So, mantle of the expert, it's this strange term, this strange phrase, which maybe some people find a bit off putting because it's so strange. What is mantle? Why is it called mantle of the expert? I'll get on to that. So, it's a method of teaching across the curriculum and meeting your teaching aims. And so you ask young people that you're working with to think of themselves as if they are a fictional team of some sort, an expert team. You have a fictional client, somebody who comes along and says there's a job that they want doing. And so that's a fictional commission. Dorothy would call it a commission. I know we've had some conversations in the past with some of the people who've done these courses about the words, the language, because it can be tricky to translate some of these terms. So commission simply means a job. Commission can mean different things in different contexts. It's a big job that they get to do. And everybody understands that it's fiction. So this is really the drama element at the start, is this as if. It's agreeing to talk as if. And everybody is clear that it is a fiction. You as a teacher make it clear all the time that it is a fiction. Sometimes teachers have not made that clear, and it's not a good thing, because then the young people you're working with, if they think it's real and then they find out that it isn't, that's that well that it can be very upsetting for them, I think. But as long as you say to them, this is a fiction, it might feel real, but it's a fiction. Is that okay? Can we agree to talk as if? And they'll accept that completely. Now, in some books that have been published on drama, Mantle of the Expert appears as if it's one teaching strategy for drama among many. So it appears alongside drama strategies you may be familiar with, like freeze frames or thought tracking, so on. But to me, that's wrong, because it isn't simply one kind of strategy. It's more than that. You actually can't just say to a group, oh, let's be experts for 10 minutes, as you might say, let's do a freeze frame, because it goes deeper than that. Because it's not just about a particular strategy. It is about, for me, it's a way of thinking about teaching. There are certain principles behind it that are always in my head when I'm using it, when I'm teaching. And these are some of the things that, as I say, have become second nature to me. It's part of what I do. It's part of the way I think about teaching and learning. It is about how people learn and how we teach. So I do say to people, if you really take it on, it will change you as a teacher. It will change the way you think about teaching and the way you think about learning. So mantle. Mantle is this word that means it's like a cloak. But Dorothy said, well, I'm not talking about clothes or costume. It's taking on, as she says here, it's like a declaration. It means I declare, the people who are working in this team declare that they will uphold the lifestyle and standard of my calling. So it's like the job you're taking on is not just a job. You're dedicated to a calling. You might say that teachers might feel that they have a calling rather than simply a job. And that's the feeling that she wants, that you're taking on this responsibility and you take it seriously. An expert, meaning, furthermore, I will undertake to take seriously the acquisition and using of those skills deemed necessary and in that lifestyle I have entered because of my calling. I mean, she wouldn't actually use this, she wouldn't actually ask people to say this, but that's underlying it all, is this sense of you want people, the young people you're working with, to take on this responsibility and to feel that it is something they take seriously. And even though it's simply a drama, it's that strange thing, even though it's not real, people take it on as if it is real. So one of the principles behind this way of working, this is a list that Dorothy came up with. She calls it paradigms or views of children or young people. As you see the children you're working with, that will shape and determine your teaching. So she came up with this list, half joking one day, but it does sum up some of the things that teachers say, or some of the views that teachers have of children, perhaps. And I think in our education system, the kind of key model that we have of teaching is this one at the bottom, child as vessel. So it's the idea of child as an empty container. The child has got nothing in it and needs to be filled with knowledge, and the teacher is the one doing the filling. And that's the way that curriculums work, in my experience, certainly here in England. There is a body of knowledge and information which children have to learn because they don't know it. And it's logical, really. if you think about it, it's logical. Yes, there's all this information that we want young people to know. So it's logical that we have to tell them, and then we have to find ways to um, make it accessible to them, and also test them on it to check that they've known it, they've learned it. Dorothy called this the transmission model because the teacher is the one who knows, and the children, and they transmit it to the children. And there are some teachers, I think, who would say, well, yes, that's the way it is, and it's the way it should be. I know that sometimes Shuba can tell us that we've had people working with us from India who've said, I've talked to my colleagues, and they say, well, why should we stop? We are the ones who know. Why should we stop doing that? Dorothy's view was that, well, the problem in that system is that it leaves the young people passive. They are always the receivers of knowledge. They're the ones who don't know. They're the ones who've got to be taught it. They're the ones who've got to be tested on it. And creates a kind of teacher dependence. They are dependent on the teacher as the one who knows, and they're dependent on the teacher to tell them what to do. It creates that kind of student mindset. It creates a mindset that says, okay, I'm a student and I'm going to sit back and you're the teacher, teach me. And it becomes a problem when you go up the education system and you come to university, and suddenly young people are now being asked, they've got to have their own initiative, they've got to have their own independence. And I do some teaching at universities, and I think that young people can struggle with that. Suddenly they've got to be independent learners. So, one of the things you're really trying to do is make young people take on responsibility for their own learning and their own knowledge. You want them to own the knowledge. And I think it's a thing that if they've found things out themselves, if they've investigated something, if they've understood something themselves, then they own that knowledge. And it's different than if they've been taught it in a more conventional way and they've been tested on it. I think there is this tendency, there is this danger that people learn things now for the exams, and then after the exams finished, they forget it. They don't really own it to carry with them for the rest of their lives. So that's what Dorothy felt about the problems of transmission teaching. And her alternative model is this child as crucible. So the idea is, as it says here, me and you, that's the teacher and the class, have to keep stirring everything around together. We're investigating things together. We are trying to understand things together. We're trying to explain the world to each other. And it's kind of, if you've got that idea in your head, then that's what I mean really about it can change you as a teacher, because you're thinking about the way classrooms work differently. This is something that Dorothy said. She said, now I am a crucible. I regard myself as one, and I believe children are crucibles. But this changes the world of the school. If tomorrow you walk into the school and you say, from this moment, it's crucibles and it's not jugs. In other words, it's not pouring knowledge in with a jug. You're changing the world, and you're going to be changing it every second you decide crucible. This is a crucible. We are a crucible. That idea of the crucible is a bowl where things are stirred round. So it's crucible rather than vessel, rather than pouring in. I was looking at this just this morning. This is a chart that Dorothy produced, and it shows that there's a kind of what you're trying to do. This is another of the principles behind Mantle the Expert. What you're trying to do is create a power shift in the classroom. So right at the top of this chart, you've got a situation where the student only obeys orders, and the teachers are the ones who specify the tasks, who say how to begin, when to begin, define why. And so that's one end of this chart. The other end is where you've got a situation where things have shifted. Things have shifted. This is all in stages in this chart, but at the bottom of the chart, you have a situation where the students are carrying the entire responsibility of advancing the work from the present position to the next stage. And the teacher is apparently, at least, uncertain what to do next. Now, that's kind of a continuum. Yeah, I'm not saying that in Mantle of the Expert, you will always be at the bottom of that chart in that position. But there are times when I've come to that in my own teaching or close to it, when you've got a group that is so involved, that is so engaged, that is really taken on this job that they've got to do, this sense of this is our team. We have ownership over this together. And so you stop being the person who's always telling them what to do. There's a thing often in classrooms when you're working with young people that the teacher is the one who sets the tasks. And so you often find, if you're a teacher in the classroom, I think, that you get children coming to you and saying, I've finished now, so what do I do now? So they're dependent on the teacher telling them. But ideally, you get to a position where everybody's on board, everybody's committed to this task, to this job that they're doing. And they will be finding work themselves. They won't stop and say, what do I do now? They've got things they need to do, they want to do. There is that sense with Mantle when it's really working that everybody is pulling together as a team and wants. There's a kind of engagement that you don't get if the teachers and students are in the conventional teacher-student relationship, I think. There's one group one school actually, where I was working, and the children were asked for their views on Mantle of the Expert. And one of the things they said was, we love Mantle of the Expert because we're in charge. And I was thinking to myself, it's not really true, because as a teacher, you're there to teach and you're there to guide, and you're doing it maybe in subtle ways, but you are guiding it because you're leading it towards your teaching aims or your aims for the group and the individuals in it. But they certainly have a feeling that they're in charge. And that's something that's very different for them, I think, because often in schools, they don't feel that they are the ones in charge. So Dorothy invented Mantle of the Expert because she wanted to get rid of what she called dummy runs in teaching. This means dummy runs means that there's a sense of doing things in schools because, well, there's no real reason for doing it. Children might say, why are we doing this? And the explanation often might be, well, you'll need it one day. You'll need it when you leave school, or you need it for the exams. There's not a real purpose for it. And one of the things that Dorothy would say is that we learn things usually in life in a context, in a situation. We learn it, we might learn, for example, a foreign language because we need it for a job that we're doing. And it gives that extra purpose and extra investment in doing it because we know it's going to be useful to us. And we don't just learn it, we practice it and we apply it. Now, Mantle of the Expert creates this fictitious context. And as I say, everyone knows it's fiction, and yet people do take it on board as if it's real. It's the strange thing about drama. People will take it on. And so it does create this sense of a context and a purpose. If there are people who are, if there are people who are running a museum, for say, a fictional museum, it doesn't mean that they are being trained to become people who would run a museum in real life. That's simply the context. They will do all sorts of things within that context, many of them things that museum workers in the real world would never do. But it creates that context, that purpose. And they now are doing things, the students are doing things, not because teacher says so, but because there's this client, this outside client, this outside force. We're doing it for the client. We want to please the client, the person who's given us the job to do, or maybe we're thinking about the people who will visit our museums or the people who will come to our travel agency and we need to help them, whatever the team is. So we're thinking, so the teacher shifts. The teacher shifts away from that position of I'm the one always in charge and telling people and giving them the information. The teachers now, you can get that sense of a crucible. You can get that sense of working together because you can get a job to do. And you as teacher, instead of saying, now what I want you to do is this, 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 and this, the teacher can be in this position of, even though they've come up with this whole scenario, this whole situation, this whole commission, this job, the teacher can be in a position of saying, well, I don't know how we're going to do this. Do you know how we're going to do it? And you can shift it to them, to the team, to the group, to all of us together working on this and finding out about it and explaining the world to each other. And one of the things as well about drama is that it matters now. It creates this sense of, oh, we've got to do this now. We've got to work this out now. We've got to, because we're going to be doing this, we've got this job to do. So we need to do it now. It's happening now. It's not something that we're learning about that maybe one day we'll need in real life. It gives it that sense of immediacy and urgency. So it does change the way you operate in the classroom. You're trying to get away from this teacher dependency. You're trying to, it's not just a change for you, it's a change for them. You're trying to shift them from this mindset of, I'm a student, I sit back, you teach me. And so you're using drama to do that. You're creating this fictitious context so that you can break that usual pattern of teacher-student relationship, teacher dependency. And so you're also trying to change from the teacher as the one who knows. You're trying to get them to investigate and find things out. So either you don't know, or sometimes, quite often, in fact, I will pretend that I don't know because I want to be in that position where I'm working with them and trying to find out together. And often, in fact, you will find that the children will surprise you and will come up with things or see things that you didn't see, that you didn't know, that you didn't think about, because you're sharing it together. Because this drama work is a group process and you're working together as a team. That's another change, because a lot of teaching, I think, the way education is set up, I'm not attacking teachers here, I'm talking about the way education is set up. It isolates people because they've got to get on with their individual work and they've got to do their individual exams. This is very much a team process. We're working together as a team. So this client becomes your external agent. You're doing them for the client, or you're doing it for our company, our team. So yes, it's changing the students too. It's making them active agents in their learning. And this is what I mean about how it's really a way of thinking about teaching and learning. Here's an example of a starting point that I've used sometimes on this course. And this is one of the principles. If you're going to teach this way, so you're not going to be somebody telling them things. You're trying to get away from that. So how do you do it? And one of the things you do is you create materials that will do the teaching for you. You're creating materials that they will investigate and try and make sense of. And if you've created these materials, then you can be working with them and investigating it with them. So this is one of the key things, I think. It's about how you create those materials. And this is a starting point. One of the starting points that I quite like to use is a map. So this was a plan of a museum. When I worked in a classroom with it, I had a huge version of this, and we could all sit around and look at it. And we simply, the first question is, okay, what do we think it is? And there are certain clues there, an information desk, the toilets, and so on. Sooner or later, somebody says, well, I think it's a museum. Now, I've used it for a particular type of museum. I've said, okay, well, it is a museum. It's a museum in the center of town, the center of a large town, and it's got an unusual role, an unusual name. It's called the Museum of Myths and Legends. And there are certain rooms in this museum, animal stories, monsters, gods and spirits, people, wars and conflicts, creation myths. And with the group, we decide what the order might be of these different areas in the museum. And we start to think about what objects or what images, what artworks might be in each of these spaces. And we're just speculating together. I bring in some pictures. I say these are objects in this museum. I wonder where they might be. Where might we find them? Which space might we find them in the museum? And so we look at, okay, well, it might be in the monsters space, or it might be in the gods and spirits space. And all the time, this is my curriculum area that I'm going to go for is myths and legends. And as this is my starting point, it's helping me to understand what they know already about myths and legends. And it's also bringing in what they know so that we're not starting from what they don't know, we're starting from what they know. And we start to make some decisions about this place. Oh, I might say, there might be other spaces, of course, in this museum. What else might there be? Can we think of any other sections that you might have in this museum? So they will choose one or two. They will think about some of the myths, some of the stories, some of the heroes, or that there might be found in this museum. I come up with other tasks. I say, well, I've got some sheets here which tell different myths and legends. Can we sort out what can one group of you take responsibility for the area called monsters? Can you look at these sheets? Can you cut them up and paste them together to show us what might be in that section called monsters? So again, this is an example of a task where they are now starting to pick up maybe stories, myths that they didn't know before. They're starting to add to this shared knowledge. And at a certain point, I would say to them, do you think we can agree to think of ourselves as if we're running this museum? Of course, we're not running a real museum, but can we agree to talk about it as if it's real? And I've never known a group say no, because what you've tried to do by that stage is to win their interest so that they are already really talking about, well, yes, we can have this in this space, we can have that in that space. They're already talking in a way as if they are. people running the museum. And so it's only a step from that to saying, well, actually, can we do this? Can we be running this museum? And when you're doing this, when you've set up your museum, you can, of course, then be reaching your teaching target in terms of, in this case, myths and legends, or whatever it might be. But you can also bring in lots of other different kinds of work. It could be maths, it could be art, it could be science, it can be all sorts of things. You can shape it and guide it by the tasks they do, by the jobs they get to do, by the things that need to be done in this museum that we are supposed to be running. That you can shape it and guide it so that it is reaching your teaching targets, but it's all done within a context. And this, to me, is a rough structure for a Mantle of the Expert project. Now, a project might last some weeks. There's a school, a primary school in England near where I live. I'm a governor at this school. It's Woodrow First School. And a large part of the teaching, nearly 50% of the teaching, is through Mantle of the Expert. And they will, usually a class will be running one of these expert teams for a term. So you're talking about 10, 12 weeks. And they'll be doing Mantle probably most days. They will do a couple of hours of Mantle of the Expert, doing their expert team. So within that, of course, you can get in a lot of different kinds of teaching that you want to achieve. Depends on your own situation as a teacher, of course. You might be a teacher in a secondary school, or you might be like me, somebody who goes into a school, sometimes a primary school, sometimes a secondary school, and does a project for only a certain limited amount of time. So in that case, it might be a shorter project. It might be, I've done Mantle of the Expert projects over like 5 half-day sessions. You adjust what you're doing in terms of the group you're working with and the availability of time that you have with them. But to me, this is the kind of structure that I use. It's not set. There's no sort of set formula for it, but I think there's a logic to this, and it's based in what Dorothy herself talked about. You start by engaging their interest, as I was doing with the museum example I gave you. And then you're building their sense of their job and who they are and their expertise. So I call it building the frame, because frame just means point of view. We look at the world as museum workers. We look at the world as people running a travel agency. There's that sense of, yes, we know who we are. We know what we do. We know what our job is. We know what it involves. So when you're building that sense of who we are, it's often through smaller jobs that come along. And then at a certain point, you're bringing in this idea of this somebody who wants us to do a big job. And it might be in the form of a letter that arrives, or an email, or a video that asks us to do this big job. And the teacher has prepared this letter, this email, whatever. They've prepared it so that what it says will then form the basis of the teaching that you want to do and will meet your teaching targets. In the case of the Museum of Myths and Legends, for example, the curriculum we were ending up going towards was actually the myths and legends of the Native American Cherokee tribe. And so they got, the big job they got to do was from somebody who comes from the Cherokee Nation, who wanted them, they discovered a diary, an old diary, and they wanted to create an exhibition around this diary. And so that was the big job that this museum then had to do. So they had lots of tasks to do in connection with that. And it all ended in a form of publication. And when I say publication, there's always something at the end where there's a form of public sharing, not necessarily a publication like a book, but public sharing. Here it was the opening of, well, not the exhibition itself, but a demonstration of what we were planning to do in our exhibition. So we had artwork, we had displays, we had stories that the children had written. The teacher I was working with had guided, steered everything so that it would be achieving their teaching aims. But within this world, this context, within this sense of this is our team, we run this museum, this is our job. We invited parents in, we invited members of the community in to see this exhibition that we'd created. So it created a big final event for the whole project. And so I think you can say that the teacher was satisfied because they had learned the things that they were supposed to be learning in the curriculum. But the children also felt a sense of achievement and of having run the show. They've made it happen themselves. And as I say, I think that the difference there is that they own the knowledge.